If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Question from Antoine Belton. Dr. Price, Bart Ehrman published his newest book earlier this year called Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife. I haven't had a chance to read the book, but in one of his recent interviews, he asserts that the ideas of heaven and hell originally came from Greek philosophers. He claims that this is first articulated in the writings of Plato. I've done some research, and it seems that some theologians have argued that dualism is a Platonic idea that was imported into Judaism. Plato appears to have writings that speak of moral people being rewarded and the immoral being punished, such as the myth of Er, or Er. The reason I decided to write is because I thought dualism and many other features of modern religions were influenced by Zoroastrianism. This would mean the concept of heaven and hell were Persian and not Greek. So my question is, was it the religion of Zoroastrianism that gave Jews this idea of reward and punishment after death, or Plato? Thanks, Antoine.
I don't know. I mean, I think both of them were very influential in that cultural sphere. One thing you can, clear piece of evidence for that is the Nag Hammadi texts, because there are Zoroastrian Christian texts which are sort of mind-boggling. And there's also pieces of Platonic works. And one of which has something to do with the Gospel of Thomas, saying, "Blessed is the man who eats the lion, for the lion shall become man," etc. And so they're both floating around. Zoroaster is a Greek version of Zarathustra, so they certainly knew about him. And there are parallels between Greek religion. Well, I think in the story is reincarnated, having been killed on the battlefield. Socrates is pictured as expecting perhaps to meet with great thinkers of the past once he dies from the hemlock. He didn't seem to know what would happen. He says, if there's nothing, well, I'm no worse off. But if, as some say, I'll meet these great people of the past, hey, sounds good to me. I'm not that familiar with what Plato said about this stuff. I think in Zoroastrianism, you do have the idea of heaven and hell. Heaven is called the house of song, and there are other spirits with Ahura Mazda there. And they existed before earthly beings were created. There are guardian angels that we all have that are up there. Hell is called the house of the lie, and that's where Ahriman, the anti-god, holds sway with his demons and so on. And the idea that the devil rules hell appears in Zoroastrianism, not in the Bible, not any place in the Bible. And I think it has to have come from Zoroastrianism. How do you determine who's going to be in heaven and hell in Zoroastrianism? Well, when the Saoshayans, their messianic figure, a remote descendant of Zoroaster, appears, he will resurrect all the dead, good and evil, and they will undergo a bath in molten lead. And the righteous, to them it'll be like a bath in warm milk. They won't be affected. But to the wicked, it'll seem like a bath in molten lead. And it could be a purgatory. It could just burn out the wicked. But some people are so darn wicked that that's going to be the end of them. But the wicked that survive will go to hell, to the house of the lie. Now, the notion of the guardian angels, who are kind of a higher version of you, appears in some Jewish and Gnostic Christianity in like the 2nd century. That's gotta, well, even in the New Testament, but that's 2nd century too. Like when Peter is on death row and Herod Agrippa wants to have him beheaded, just like he did with James, son of Zebedee. And unfortunately, apparently, James didn't have anybody praying for him because Peter did. And in answer to it, he sends an angel to get Peter out of jail. And he first thinks he's dreaming, but when he gets out to the street and the angel disappears, that this really happened. Amazing. Well, in the meantime, his followers had been praying for him at John Mark's house. Well, he makes a beeline for it, knocks on the door, and the maid opens the door far enough to see who he is. She is stunned and runs back and says, "It's Peter at the door." And the reaction, and this is hilarious, and intentionally so, I'm convinced, the head of the house says, "You're crazy, it must be his angel." What does that mean? Well, his guardian angel, who looks just like him, and he concludes Peter has been killed, but his ghost is coming to say goodbye. That was the Zoroastrian thing. And then Peter comes in. These pious Christians are praying, and it doesn't even occur to them that God might have answered their prayer. I mean, that is just unsurpassable as a satire by a Christian on Christians. It's hilarious, but his angel, that's what it has to mean. In other words, the guy thought, well, he looked like Peter. That's where your mistake was. Well, that's because it was, that's what they thought it was. Like in Matthew, be careful, you don't cause one of these little ones to stumble, because their angels are always standing before my Father in heaven. Yeah, they're protecting them. You're in big trouble if you screw them up. And so they had the Zoroastrian idea of guardian angels, which is actually quite profound, because the notion, they used to have this, Gnostic and some Jewish Christians had the idea of the sacrament of the bridal chamber, that at some point in the initiation you would encounter the heavenly bridegroom, which was the resurrected Christ, who is the higher form of you. I mean, this is really profound stuff, and not orthodox exactly. But really, how different is it from saying you're part of the body of Christ and so on?
Right.
So that's Zoroastrianism. That's where they seem to have gotten it. There must have been interaction between Greeks and Zoroastrians. Again, they knew the name. We know there was between Jews and Zoroastrians for a lot of reasons. As you know, I think Manson was right, T.W. Manson, I think. William Manson, who said that the Pharisees originally meant the Parsees because they had embraced the doctrines pretty much imposed on them by the Ezra Nehemiah crowd, who were Persian representatives. Sadducees didn't buy it, which is why they're what the hell with your oral tradition. It's more like anal tradition. But there's a link there, and we're told that some of the rabbis, in order to smuggle Zoroaster into the biblical tradition, said, well, he's the same guy that is mentioned in Jeremiah as Baruch. So, yeah, it's a way of saying he's a scriptural author. We like him. And so there's influence both ways. Now, was there Zoroastrian influence on the Greeks? Well, it's hard to say, especially because the Zoroastrian scriptures are a total mess. We don't know what was written before what else. We don't know who wrote any of the stuff. So different scholars have tried to piece it together in what seems like a plausible developmental order, but it's all conjectural. But so I don't know what's before what, but the Greeks, or at least Plato has in the Timaeus, I think, this story of the creation of human beings, and that originally they were hermaphroditic egg-shaped creatures with two sets of everything. And there were double males, double females, and male females. And to get something happening on Earth, Zeus chopped them all in half, creating lesbians, gays, and heterosexuals. And all three of them had burning desire for their sundered other half, and that's where the sex drive comes from. Which is what it says in Genesis, but it only envisions males and females.
The correct one, according to their... Yeah, okay.
And that the rabbis said it kind of looks like Adam was supposed to be one of these hermaphrodites, and when it says God took from his side, that means the same thing. He divided one into two. Well, that's what Zoroastrianism says, that the first human created was Gaiomard, and he was a round character with double limbs and all that, and that Ahriman decided to nip humanity in the bud by chopping him in half, little realizing that he was only guaranteeing there'd be a whole human race, because now they could reproduce. Well, who had this one first? There's no way to know, but it could well be an idea borrowed by Plato from Zoroastrianism, or whatever Greeks he was inheriting it from. One other thing, that there was Greek and Zoroastrian influence on eschatology, not only the resurrection of the dead, but the fiery hell. That seems to come both from the late division of Tartaros, the Greek netherworld, into Hades and Elysium, the Elysian fields, where the righteous would go, pleasure garden, like Eden. And Tartaros was, or Hades was, maybe I got this wrong. I think Hades was the name of the whole thing, and Tartaros was where the wicked went. And they were tortured in various imaginative ways, kind of like in Dante's Inferno. And this wasn't the original idea. Hades was just where you went when you died, just like Sheol in the Old Testament. You're not tormented there. It's just a kind of dull, boring place to be forever. Your ghosts go there, and God has forgotten about you, and you have forgotten about God. It's a real drag, but it's not having your guts twisted on a hot poker, at least, right? But it too was divided into the punishments of hell and the fiery hell and so on. Where did it get that idea? Okay, the division seems to come from Greece, but the notion of a fiery hell, that has Israelite roots, because the original version of it was Tophet, or Gehenna, which was supposed to be the subterranean fiery kingdom of the god Molech or Moloch, who to whom one offered babies as sacrifices. The Old Testament mentions that more than once. And it wasn't implied that the infants were suffering in hell, though it's a horrible, unthinkable, barbarous thing to do. But at least it's not being tormented forever, like in Revelation. And the Yahweh had infant sacrifices offered and so on too. Well, that wasn't a place of post-mortem torment, and adults didn't go there when they died. But that was the opposite of heaven, where Yahweh lived above the third heaven in the flood and all that in outer space. So eventually that became a hell of torment for the wicked under the influence of Sicilian Neo-Pythagorean missionaries, like Apollonius of Tyana was one of those, though he wasn't from Sicily. But Sicily's geography suggested it, because it had volcanoes, fumaroles, lava pits that you could fall into if you weren't careful. And they said, well, that's what Tartarus is going to be like. And they spread out all over the Mediterranean, spreading that horror story. And that appears to be where Western religions got the idea of a fiery hell of post-mortem torment. So again, Zoroastrians, Greeks, Bible, it's difficult to know how to connect those dots, but they're sure connected.